So let's get started, shall we? Talking about delivery methods and dosing. I want to advance my screen. There we go. I want to start by getting our terminology straight. When we're talking about delivery methods, we are talking about how to get the beneficial compounds that live in the plant from the plant into our endocannabinoid receptor system. And there are about 3 main ways to do that, and each of those methods produces a slightly different effect in terms of not only how you will feel as a patient, but also the duration and the quality of the experience. So we'll talk about those. And then we're going to talk about dosing, and you might hear the word titration used sometimes. Cannabis is a self-titrated medicine. So when we're talking about dosing or titration, we're talking about the amount of cannabis in any of its forms that a person needs to achieve relief with minimal to no unwanted side effects. So it's not quite like a prescription where there's a 10 milligram pill that you swallow. Patients do find that it's fairly easy, especially with inhaled forms, to find the correct dose. But we'll talk about what that means and again, using the minimal amount that you need to get relief while still being functional. And we'll also touch on what happens if you do happen to take a load too much, which does happen sometimes. So when we're talking about these subject matters, when we're talking about these active compounds in the plant, they live, for the most part, in the trichomes. And these are the resinous glands that cover the surface of the female cannabis flower and some of the leaves. And so you can see in the picture on the left there, those white sort of, they almost look like hairs at that magnification. And they appear all throughout the flower, and at the bottom right-hand side of that picture, you see there's a fan leaf that would get trimmed off during harvest, but there are crystals, resin glands on that leaf, on those leaves as well. And so if you happen to be growing at home and you're doing a trim, you want to save your trimmings because there are active compounds in those that maybe don't end up being visually appealing when you've trimmed those leaves off, but they will be medicinally, therapeutically beneficial. In the middle there you see a close-up of some of these trichomes, and you notice that the tops of the ones that look like mushrooms are amber, and that's a good sign that a plant is getting ready to harvest. As the active compounds in those trichomes mature, the color changes. And so the plant on the far left is not ready to harvest. You see those are all pretty white and undeveloped. They're not fully developed. In the middle, those trichomes are probably ready to go. And then on the far right, that's a scanning electron micrograph picture of the cannabis trichomes. And there are active compounds throughout. The cannabinoids particularly live in the little mushroom caps in high concentrations. These active molecules reside in those caps on the stems of those mushroom-like things. And this is important as you're handling your medicine. It's easy to forget that when you're touching your medicine, your fingers are getting sticky. That's because those little trichome heads are breaking off. And you don't want to lose those, again, because that's where the active compounds are. There are some types of grinders, for example, that will have a keef catcher that is a separate compartment that will save those broken off trichome glands. And then you can also use those. We'll see a picture of that in a moment. So our active compounds live in the trichomes. As it says here, the leaves themselves do have phytonutrients in them. There are folks who juice raw cannabis, add it into their smoothies, and there are health benefits to that. Typically, in those cases, those products are not psychoactive, and we'll talk about why. In part because they don't have many of those trichomes on them. So, a very valuable plant Good to know when you're handling your medicine to do it carefully because the therapeutic compounds that you want are in those resin glands. When the trichomes dry up and fall off and they gather as a powder, like I mentioned, in those grinders, they have a keef catcher. That's what we call it, keef, K-I-F. And that's just the granulated resin caps that have fallen off of a cannabis flower. So there are three active compounds in the plant, three therapeutically beneficial pieces of material in the plants, and those are the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids. Now, cannabinoids are chemical, they're molecules essentially, and you see a few of them listed in this diagram here. Terpenes are molecules that are in control of how your cannabis smells, and they also, we're finding, have therapeutic value. And then flavonoids, as their name implies, affect also the flavor of the plant. And we're finding more and more out about flavonoids. We know that they exist, we know that they're therapeutic, and we don't have quite as much research into them just yet. So for today, let's look at the cannabinoids and the terpenes for sure. The cannabinoids, now this wheel lists some of the active cannabinoids. There are dozens of them in the plant. And these are the ones that are maybe most common, maybe the ones that we know the most about via scientific research. And so it's important to notice first that it's just this top right-hand quadrant, the delta-9 THC-A, delta-9 THC, delta-8, and then THCV. Those are the psychoactive components. And actually, it's really delta-9 THC that is the primary source of any psychoactivity or high that you get from your medicine. For some people, that euphoria is itself therapeutic, so we certainly don't see it as a necessarily unwanted side effect. But some people do feel uncomfortable with that feeling. THC can exacerbate and make worse certain anxious disorders. If you have anxiety, a high THC medicine is maybe not your first choice. But it is important to note that is where the psychoactivity lays. And I also pay attention to delta-9 THC-A. We're going to hear more about that toward the end of this class when we start talking about cooking. THC-A, the A stands for acid. There's an acid molecule or piece of that chain. It is, again, it does have therapeutic value. It is mildly psychoactive, much less psychoactive than it becomes when you separate out that extra piece of the molecular chain and turn it into delta-9 THC. Some of the others, you probably are familiar with CBD, that's cannabidiol, and there's been a great deal of interest in cannabidiol in the last several years. About 14 states now have passed CBD-only medical marijuana law, which is interesting in that, every marijuana plant will have all of the active compounds in it. They have them in different ratios, and certainly you can breed a plant to express a greater percentage of CBD than any of the other compounds. However, the idea that there is a cannabis plant out there that would have 20% CBD and 0% THC in its natural state, we have not gotten there genetically yet. CBD is really interesting for scientific research because, as you see there's quite a list of things that it has been shown to do. And these things, everything from reducing inflammation to slowing bacterial growth, they have definitely seen this in the lab. Here in the U.S., we do not have the ability to study cannabis very easily, and so we don't have a rich scientific library of phase 3 human clinical trials yet, but we do see some very, very promising things, both from CBD and THC. Those are definitely the two that there is the most science around. And then there are some others there that you can see. So when we're talking about cannabinoids, this is what we're talking about, right? I want to go back briefly to this idea that there are states that are passing CBD-only laws. CBD is in itself a very valuable compound, and there's a lot of promise. A lot of people with epileptic disorders are finding relief using things that are, kind of medicines that are high in THC, in CBD. But the idea of isolating any one of these compounds and pharmaceuticalizing it, and turning it into, a pill, a standard pharmaceutical medicine, we're going to lose something when that happens. I believe that it will happen. It has already happened with delta-9 THC. The pharmaceutical version of that single molecule is called dronabinol or Marinol, and it is a Schedule III drug that is approved to be prescribed for cancer patients to treat nausea and lack of appetite. So I believe that that will happen to CBD and probably some of the other cannabinoids, that they will be isolated and turned into pharmaceutical products. I do also believe that patients who use the whole plant are getting a synergistic entourage effect from the interaction of these various compounds. For example, we know, it's not on this list here, but we know that one of the things that CBD does is it helps reduce the amount of psychoactivity that delta-9 THC causes. So in the natural plant, the CBD levels are helping prevent an excessive amount of that euphoric high, right? They help to balance each other out. And when you separate these out and pull one aside and turn it into its own medicine, you lose that entourage effect. And so this is, this is something that certainly patients need to be aware of as we move towards a political environment where cannabis in some form is going to be not only in the state, but eventually at the federal level. It's very important for us to protect patients' right to grow their own, to have access to the whole plant medicine. And ensure that the pharmaceuticals that are developed will help many people, and that's as it should be, but we don't want that to be at the expense of a patient's right to grow a therapeutic plant for themselves. How are we doing there, Producer Ben? Producer Ben nods. He says we're doing okay. All right, so we talked about cannabinoids and then terpenes and flavonoids. So these are a few of the terpenes that are found in cannabis and in many other plants. Terpenes and flavonoids appear in a number of plants. Cannabinoids, of course, are distinct to the cannabis plant. But terpenes like pinene, it's got that nice piney flavor. Limonene on the far right, you'll smell that in, say, your lemon skunk. Lavender and linalool, that's sort of a pleasant, relaxing, sort of a therapeutic effect. And so these are just a few of the terpenes. When we're ingesting cannabis, of course, for a lot of people that involves lighting it on fire in some manner. You're smoking a joint or from a pipe. What you lose when you do that are the effective benefits of some of the cannabinoids and many of the terpenes, because they evaporate. Their boiling points are lower than the temperature when you're applying flame to your cannabis. So when we're talking about some of the delivery methods that we're about to get into, we tend to recommend those that use a lower temperature, that maybe avoid combustion. And there are a number of reasons for that. It's easier on the lungs as well. But it's also because you get a more flavorful and fuller therapeutic experience of the plant at lower temperatures. All right, so let's talk about some of these delivery methods. Three main ways to do it, right? We can eat it, we can inhale it, or we can apply a topical. We can rub it on our skin, okay? The process whereby there's a transfer from the air or from the food material or from the tincture into our bloodstream, into us, so that it can begin to have a therapeutic effect, is different for each of these formats, right? When you're inhaling, whether it's a joint or a vaporizer, it's obviously going into your lungs, and then there are alveoli in the lungs, and those are responsible for taking the active compounds out of the inhaled air and transmitting it into your bloodstream. So inhalation is an extremely quick way to get relief. There are downsides, and we'll talk about those. But for somebody who feels that migraine coming on or is in acute pain and needs immediate relief, inhalation is going to be the fastest method to get relief. When we eat cannabis, there's a longer process, right? So some of those active compounds will be absorbed in your mouth as you chew. If you're using a tincture and you swish that around in your mouth a little bit before you swallow it, you'll get a slightly quicker onset because the mucous membranes there, there are more blood vessels close to the surface there. But certainly when we're eating something like a cookie or a cracker, the majority of the active compounds are being digested through our digestive tract. And so it takes longer, right? Some of it's going through the stomach wall, some of it is getting processed through our liver, and that's actually an important thing to realize when you're eating cannabis. And I would say that it's probably the easiest way to miscalculate and overdo on accident is to eat it. And this is because when the active compounds pass through liver, remember that THCA, that molecule? Your liver helps convert that into THC. If there is any remaining unconverted THCA in your edible product, it will get converted. Much of it will get converted in your liver. And so you might eat something, and within an hour, you feel, okay, well, that's good pain relief, and then another 15 minutes later, it's passed through your liver, and you suddenly feel like, oops, it's a little too much now, right? And so that's what's happening there. There's a chemical conversion that your body is doing. It is not fatal. No one, it may be unpleasant, but it's not physically dangerous. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we eat, it takes longer to have an effect. It also has a longer lasting effect. So someone who is in chronic pain and maybe wakes up stiff in the morning, but also needs to function throughout the day, might find that it's best to take a few sips off my vaporizer in the morning, and then at the same time take a few crackers or take a bite of a cookie, because that reaction, that therapeutic effect, will last longer than the inhalation will. And then finally, there's topicals. And topicals, yes, there can be balms or salves, lotions, even transdermal patches. We'll talk about those. The important thing to know about topicals is that cannabis alone, unless there are other agents added to it, if you put cannabis in coconut oil or cannabis in shea butter and apply it to your skin, it will not penetrate into your bloodstream. And so you will not get a psychoactive effect from a topical. Now, transdermal patches are different because they put a chemical in there that helps penetrate into the bloodstream. But if you make your own or get a salve here from WCM and rub that on, you'll get localized pain relief, but no psychoactivity. You should not. I can say that they well, as part of finding that out, I guess they have done research on that, and of course they use rodents, rats a lot for this sort of research. And apparently rodent skin is much thinner than ours. And so when they tried some infused topicals on the rodents did indeed get a psychoactive effect. They could not complete the mazes as well. But for humans, it does not happen that way. And topicals we'll talk about in just a moment. They're very, I think they're underestimated or underknown, perhaps. There are some really good options. At the bottom of this page, you see a recommended resource. You'll see a couple of those throughout this presentation. Paleotech did a very nice job explaining in more detail all the different ways that cannabis gets into our system depending on how we ingest it. So I would recommend that you check that out as well. So when we're inhaling, we've got some options, and we're going to start on the bottom left there. That is Kathy Jordan. Kathy is a Lou Gehrig's patient in Florida, and she has been living with Lou Gehrig now for over 2 decades, and credits cannabis with having allowed her to maintain the level of mobility and the quality of life that she has maintained. And here she is smoking a joint, and that's probably how most of us initially encounter cannabis. It's a very common way to ingest. As we mentioned, it's quick. It's you feel the effects immediately, and therefore it's easy to know how much is enough. Right. On the top right, that gentleman is in a nursing home in Israel, which allows medical marijuana use, and you can see that he is using just a regular pipe with a little torch lighter to smoke his cannabis in his room. And then on the top left, this is one sort of vaporizer. And then the bottom right is a vapor pen. And you've probably seen those. We're selling them now. They're quite popular. And the difference really between the vaporizing and the smoking, a couple of things. Number one, the vaporizer is heating the product to a temperature where those trichomes, those resin glands, turn into a vapor, but the leaf never burns. So there's never any ash, there's never any of the gaseous byproducts of combustion. You're really just getting the active compounds. And so there are benefits to this. I mean, it's a little bit more expensive up front to purchase a vaporizer, although they are getting more and more reasonably priced. So there is that upfront expense, but you may find that you use less of the actual product over time because you are really maximizing and just getting those active compounds. The vapor pen that the woman on the bottom right is using, that uses an oil. So initially when vaporizers came out, 5-10 years ago now, they started to become really popular. They were just for whole flower medicine. And recently, as more and more people have started to explore with oils and waxes and things, these pens have developed that do not use whole flower dried medicine. They use an extracted concentrate, either, as I said, an oil or some sort of a more viscous liquid form of cannabis. Comparing smoking and vaporizing from a health standpoint, I want to be very clear about this should be a recommended resource. So if you're taking notes, jot this one down. There is a physician whose name is Dr. Tashkin, Tashkin. Dr. Tashkin did some very interesting research. He looked into cannabis and tobacco and non-smokers, and has done a number of studies on this, and surprised himself. He went into it thinking that cannabis smokers, not vaporizers, smokers, would have higher rates of lung cancer, mouth cancer, throat cancer, certainly than the general population, and possibly as much as a tobacco smoker did. And he found out that that is not the case, that cannabis smokers who have never smoked tobacco have about the same instance of lung, throat, and mouth cancers as the general public, not much of a statistically significant difference. That folks who combine tobacco and cannabis have the next lowest rate of those cancers, and that tobacco-only smokers have the highest rate of those cancers. And he doesn't, we don't know why that is. We certainly know that as a therapeutic plant, cannabis does have anti-cancer properties, so that may be coming into play. But in terms of inhaling, there is a stigma around smoking because of the stigma that associates with smoking tobacco. But if you are a cannabis smoker, that is your preferred method, and you're a moderate user, it does not seem that you have any greater risk of those sorts of cancers than anyone else. He also noted that for low and moderate users of cannabis, their lung function is no different than a non-smoker's. So there's some very interesting and sort of counterintuitive research out there. And again, his name is Dr. Tashkin, Tashkin. And then another thing to note is that when we're using a vaporizer, we're getting so much more. Well, let's back this up. When we're smoking through a pipe or a joint, about 88% of what we are inhaling is non-cannabinoid gases, right? When you start using a vaporizer, depending on the type and the quality of the product that you use, you can reduce that to 5% or so, okay? And that might result in less lung irritation, throat irritation. Certainly, smoking and even vaporizing can be an irritant. And vaporizing, in that case, would be the better choice unless somebody wanted to move straight to an edible. So, how can we inhale? What form does the cannabis need to be in before we can inhale it? On the top left there, you see a dried and cured flower. How a lot of us encounter it, and then you would grind that up and roll it either using a rolling machine or by hand into a joint. You can also break smaller pieces off of that and put it in the bowl of a pipe or in your vaporizer, if that's the type of vaporizer that you have. On the top right, that's kief. That's just those dried trichomes that have fallen or been shaken off of the flower. Now, looking at that, I mean, it looks like sand. It doesn't look like much. You must remember that, if you're collecting kief at home or if you're using kief, a very small amount will do it. That is all active compound there, and so just a tiny little pinch is often enough for a patient to get therapeutic benefit. Okay? On the bottom left, that is a form of hash. When we start talking about hash, and here's another word that I think gets stigmatized in our society, hash is simply extracted cannabinoid. It's extracted active compound. If you took that kief and just pressed it between your fingers, the resin glands would break. The heat between your fingers would make the active compounds start to melt together. If you had enough of it, you could make and you kept pressing and kind of rubbing between your fingers, you could make a ball of what would then be hash. So there's no mystery, there's no magic. It's not extra potent or anything like that. It is simply a different form of the active compounds. On the bottom left there, that type of hash has been made using a solvent. And so we need to talk about that. Actually, both of those two on the bottom. The left is hash, the right would be called shatter, right? And so what these are extracted active compounds. You can do that a number of ways. You can use cold water and agitate, put fresh, dried butter in cold water and agitate that water enough to knock all of the trichomes off, and then create a cold water hash from it. Or you can remove or extract the active compounds using any number of solvents. People have used naphtha, people have used butane oil, people are using CO2 at this point. Basically what an extraction process involves is using some sort of a chemical helper to take all of those trichomes and all of those active compounds off of the leaf and the stem, right? In the case of water hash, the active solvent is the water, right? In the case of a CO2 extraction, CO2 is being used to pull those trichomes off and pull those active compounds out. And so these are all just different forms of the same thing. When you hear people talk about doing dabs or wax or shatter, they're talking about a form of these active compounds that's similar to either of those two bottom pictures. Okay? the more concentrated the product, of course, the more potent. And so, potency on this screen goes from top left to bottom right. More, each is a step more potent as you pull out non-cannabinoid material and compress those cannabinoids into a tighter and denser format. Okay? So on that bottom right picture of the shatter, just that tiniest little crumb there on the left-hand piece of it there, that little crumb that's sitting off by itself, that might be enough for a beginner, certainly, to feel relief. Okay? And again, another recommended resource there. Weekly has a very interesting article about dabbing and sort of the pros and cons. It is certainly a very potent form of the medicine and way to ingest it. For a lot of folks, it's almost too potent. So if you're curious about that, I would highly recommend checking that out. All right, so we can talk about this. The smoke from a burned cannabis joint or in a pipe is about 88% non-cannabinoid. We need to know and be honest that cannabis smoke does contain carcinogens, even though the end results, even in a moderate user, does not seem to be, especially cancer-causing. It would be disingenuous if we said, well, there's nothing bad in cannabis smoke, okay? But it does appear that it does not cause those sorts of cancers. It does appear that it does not impair our lung function. And there are a couple of resources at the bottom there in case you are curious about those studies. So that's inhaling your medicine. And again, you get an immediate effect depending on the concentration of the form, whether it's flower or kief or a form of ash. The effect will be of a certain potency and a certain duration. Typically, with inhalation, if you are testing a new, say, a strain, and you're not sure how it's going to affect you, if you take one sip off your vaporizer, let's say, and set it aside, you should feel within a minute or so the beginnings of the effect as that exchange happens in your alveoli, in your lungs, and it begins to hit your bloodstream. Within 15 minutes or so, 20, you should be feeling the maximum amount of that single sip, right, of that dose. And then it will drop off over time. So it's extremely easy to titrate and find out how much is enough when you're using an inhaled method. Okay? Ingestion is another option. And again, it might be better for somebody who wants longer lasting relief, or somebody who doesn't need immediate relief. If there's not an acute pain or an acute issue to deal with, ingestion is a very effective way to take in your medicine. And you see there, there's the blueberry muffins, we've got the cookies, there are canna capsules, you can infuse beverages. Pretty much there's a way to, if there's a favorite food that you have, there is likely a good way to infuse it with cannabis. The active compounds in the plant tend to bind to fat, which makes it very easy to cook with cannabis using butter or shea butter, again, coconut oil, olive oil, any of those types of substances are fairly easy to infuse with cannabis. And at the end of the day here, we're going to talk a little bit about a quick and easy home recipe to make your own butter, which is the basis for so many infused foods. All right, things to consider. We already mentioned the time to onset. Depending on your metabolism, on how hydrated you are, how much sleep you got last night, all sorts of factors, you may eat an edible and not really feel anything for an hour, sometimes more, right? And so it can make it difficult to titrate an edible, because here in Maine we do not have yet labs that are legally able to test for potency, and we do have labs that are doing that. There are a number of different ones that have sprung up. but there is no lab licensing yet in Maine. There is no inspection process for those labs. And it's an area, even in Colorado and some of the states that have already legalized, the lab science is kind of catching up with the people on this one. So I would imagine within the next 3 to 5 years, this will be a lot more standardized. But at least here in Maine, it is uncommon still to be able to get a product that is, you know, that has maybe on the packaging, you know, 7% THC, 12% CBD, etc. We do standardize our recipes, and we work on that constantly. And our dispensers are always going to be your best source of advice, especially with a new product, in terms of how much to start with. But because of that later time to onset, if you are trying a new edible product, best not to do that when you have to go to work or you have a social engagement to get to. The best way to try a new edible is to pick a day that you are off, that you have at leisure, and you can really be conscious and spend some time really thinking about how this product is making me feel. What we would recommend is that you take less than the suggested dose, and then wait an hour, like I said, an hour and a half, and do check-ins with yourself. Every 15 minutes or so, how am I feeling? You know, am I anxious? Do I feel energized? And really be conscious of how the product is affecting you before you add any more. Okay. The duration of the effect of edibles is going to be much longer. It may be that you will find relief for 4 to 6, 8 hours. Again, a lot of this depends on your personal metabolism. But it is an excellent way to be able to function for a long period of time without pain, without anxiety, etc. Okay? The quality of the effect from eating cannabis is different than from smoking. A lot of people report that they feel it more in their bodies, that maybe they get tired when they use an edible. And here's another reason that it's important to be conscious when you're trying a new product. Because the duration is so long. If you find that you don't like the way a product makes you feel, having eaten a smaller amount of it is at least going to mitigate that. But once you've ingested it, there's no way out but through, right? So time, water, and a calm environment really help. So, and actually that's the final line there. Water, black pepper, and breathing exercises. If you or someone you know happens to overindulge or accidentally eats more of something or a product that is more potent than they expected, there's not a great deal that can be done. There's no magical pill that you can swallow that will make those effects go away right away. But there are some things you can do. Keeping hydrated really does help. Black pepper, even chewing a black peppercorn or sucking on a black peppercorn is an antidote that works remarkably well. People who are feeling very uncomfortable having had too much of an edible often find that black pepper brings them back almost like smelling salts for a fainting person. So that's a good tip to keep in mind. And then breathing exercises. Staying calm. Understanding that there is no possibility of a fatal overdose. You might feel very anxious, your heart might be racing. Some people report that they feel paranoid or they have racing thoughts. Being conscious that it is a temporary effect and focusing on something as simple as I'm breathing in and I'm breathing out can really help bring people back and ground them when that's happening. All right. And finally, topical applications. Balms, salves, creams, transdermal patches. I should have added lotions, lip balms, all kinds of products. Many of these are coconut oil based. Again, I heard shea butter. Glycerin, people have used even glycerin tinctures as topicals. Pretty much, if you are a creative person, if you enjoy cooking, it's easy to make your own topicals just as easy as it is to make butter. Again, there is no psychoactive effect except for in the middle there you see a product from Colorado, and those are transdermal patches, so they do add something to that to make it like a nicotine patch, so that it actually does penetrate to the bloodstream, and so there is some psychoactivity with those products. On the left, you see our salves that we just came out with, and you can see it's a very natural product: coconut oil, beeswax, vitamin E, and then a few herbs for the scent as well. All right. Again, a lot of folks use topicals for pain, arthritis, or kind of localized. You've got sciatica. It can be very helpful, especially if you maybe lay a heating pad on it afterwards. I have also seen, we have seen, patients who have had really positive effects from cannabis topicals on eczema and psoriasis. And these are not qualifying conditions in Maine, but for patients who have tried these products and happen to have psoriasis and eczema, in addition to their qualifying condition, they have reported relief from itching and also a reduction in the intensity of these rashes. So that's something to keep in mind if you or someone you know is living with those two conditions. So this is just an overview for you of the 3 types of methods of ingestion. So there's inhalation, things to remember quickly. Therefore, it's easy to titrate. It's easy to know when you've had enough. Things to consider about smoked or vaporized forms. It's not always easy to control odor. If you're living in an apartment, if you share space with somebody who doesn't smoke, it might be problematic for them. There is a limited duration of the effect, so you'll need to keep coming back to it if you have, say, an ongoing pain problem or a symptom that you're trying to treat. You'll need to keep inhaling every hour or so. And then accessories and storage. I've seen some pretty creative objects turned into pipes and things, apples and other objects. But typically, if you're going to be smoking, you're going to need some sort of accessories and storage for these things, whether that's papers or an odor-proof container or a vaporizer that might be something of an investment for you. So, ingestion, long-lasting relief, very discreet. You can, again, because it's so easy to infuse oils and butters, pretty much any recipe you can think of that includes an oil or a butter, you can turn into, an infused product. There is a longer time to onset, and therefore it's a little more difficult to titrate. So be aware of that. Start low and go slow. And then topicals, very targeted relief, no psychoactivity, very discreet. However, for a lot of conditions, if you're trying to treat seizures or something, that may not be as effective. But certainly something to think about if you have not tried it. All right. So, there we go. All right, we're heading into dosing. And when we talk about a dose, again, this is not quite like pharmaceuticals. When we talk about a dose of cannabis, we're talking about the minimum amount needed to achieve a therapeutic benefit. And we don't want to use enough that we have a negative reaction, that we feel anxious or like we aren't in control. So dosing is an important piece of the puzzle for a patient. The fact that the patient gets to decide the dose is called self-titration, right? So the patient determines the appropriate amount to relieve the symptoms, and it's different from pharmaceuticals, very different from pharmaceuticals. And I think this is one place where traditionally trained doctors have a stumbling block about accepting this because they are so used to being able to consult the formulary and say, okay, for this instance, we need, I'm going to recommend 5 milligrams of Marinol or 10 milligrams or, so on. And the physician can say with a pharmaceutical, you should take this twice a day. You should take this with every meal, etc. And we just don't have those standards yet for plant medicine. And given the differences, even between two cannabis plants of the same strain or the same type, I don't know that we will really ever get there with whole plant medicine. Again, certainly they can pharmaceuticalize individual compounds, but whole plant medicine is a different game. It's not entirely different, however. There are folks who might say in a sort of a snide way, so you just, this is medicine, and you just decide how much you need and when you want to take it, and the answer to that is yes, just like with an over-the-counter, right? With the one difference that it is impossible to overdose on cannabis alone, and you can overdose on over-the-counter medications. And so the idea of a patient having control is not unheard of. And good communication between the patient and the doctor is important. Some physicians might want to be reassured that people are using it for therapeutic use and not simply for the euphoric effects. But it's really, cannabis is not that much different than many other products that we use without a prescription. So. Willie said it best, right? It won't kill you unless a veil of it falls on you. We hope that does not happen to you. And it is true. Now, there are folks who will say, well, my friend died in a car accident and she had marijuana in her system, or look at, they've legalized this stuff in Colorado, and now people are getting killed in more car accidents. The fact of the matter is that is not necessarily causative. You could certainly do stupid things when you're using cannabis. You're more likely to do that if you combine cannabis with alcohol. They both potentiate each other in very bad ways. But cannabis by itself will not cause an overdose. You do not have cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem, and that is the part of the brain that controls the autonomic nervous system, your breathing and your heartbeat. When people overdose on, say, heroin or alcohol and pills, what they're doing in many cases is depressing their breathing function. There are receptors for those things in the brainstem, and so people essentially stop breathing and die that way. Cannabis will not have that sort of an effect. And this, despite the fact that the endocannabinoid receptors are the most abundant neurotransmitter receptors in your brain, except for in that one very important part that controls the autonomic nervous system. So it is possible to take too much and do silly things. It is possible to combine combine cannabis with another substance and do silly things. When folks talk about the fatality, traffic fatalities in Colorado, certainly more people are showing up with cannabis metabolites in their bloodstream after these accidents. Couple of things to note. They have only started regularly testing for those metabolites in the last 2 years. So we don't have much of a before to compare to. And number two, remember that the metabolites of cannabis can stay in your system, if you're a heavy user, for months. If you're an occasional, once a week, twice a month kind of a user, it will probably be flushed out of your system within a week. But for a patient who is regularly relying on cannabis for its therapeutic effects, you will, quote unquote, test positive at times when you have not used in days. right? When you are not feeling any sort of euphoric effect at all. So we need to be careful and watch the sort of rhetoric that forms around this issue in particular, right? That being said, a fatal overdose, no. Overdose, definitely possible, definitely unpleasant, all right? Most likely to happen when somebody is trying a new edible product. But we do know that some people who have, had their first experience with some of those concentrates that we were talking about, the hashes and the dabs and things, that they have passed out, that it has just been too much for them, right? And so that seems to be related to drops in blood pressure. When there is an overdose from an inhaled form, it seems to be because it very quickly lowers the blood pressure and people get lightheaded or dizzy, right? With edibles, again, because that pass through the liver increases the psychoactivity a notch, an overdose might look like anxiety or a panic attack. People may feel disconnected from their surroundings, like time is standing still. These are some things that people report when they've had too much. So just remember that it's not, if it happens to you or if it happens to a friend that you happen to be with, be calming, be calm yourself, keep that black pepper handy, and remember that really time and water are your friends in that situation. Okay? And I hope that it does not happen to any of you. Here's a graph that compares smoked and eaten cannabis. Now, to really understand this, and well, first of all, I want to point out that this was first published in a study in clinical and pharmaceutical therapeutics in 1980, and this information has really not changed since then. So this is pretty standard, right? The second thing I want to point out is that on this chart, the bottom line, of course, is minutes, right? 60, 120, so an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The left axis, the y-axis, you see it goes 1, 10, and then 100. And there's that 50% line, right? So just know that this chart would be a whole lot taller if we did not squeeze those later effects together, right? So what that means is that on the left-hand side for smoked cannabis, the peak effect, as you see there, occurs almost immediately, and then it plummets rapidly over the course of that first hour. And after that time, if you don't go back and take another sip from the vaporizer or pull from the bong, you will have residual cannabis compounds in your system for up to 4 hours. But after that first hour, you are likely not to feel any sort of euphoria if you were using a strain with THC in it, right? And then you look on the other side, an eaten form, and as it says, slow build, long effect, right? So you start, and within a half an hour, you're starting to feel something. Within an hour, most folks are at about the peak effect. And then you see it extend even further, 4, 5, 6 hours, and you may stop feeling the effect after, again, 5 or 6 hours. So this is also an important chart to think about if you use both forms, or if you're interested in using both forms. If you lay the smoked chart over the eaten chart, you can see that, as I've said, getting up in the morning, taking a puff or two off the vaporizer will do some immediate pain relief, and then at the same time, if you take your crackers or your edible, just when that smoked form is dropping off in that that precipitous curve, the eaten effects will be picking up to carry you out throughout the rest of the day. So, just another way to look at this, and what have I done? Oh yes. So, start low, and this is for any form, with the exception, I guess, of topicals. But when transdermal patches that are psychoactive become available in Maine, this will apply too, right? But certainly, for any form of inhaled medicine, for any form of eaten medicine, start small. Start with the lowest dose that you can, right? Start with one inhalation if it's inhaled. Start with, you know, a half of the recommended dose if it's an edible. If you've made, you know, yourself a batch of cookies, we're going to talk about a recipe in just a minute. You know, start with a quarter of a cookie. Don't eat the whole cookie right away, even if you think you know what potency you've come up with, right? So you want to start low, and you want to go slow. And that is particularly true with edibles, right? You want to go slow because you may think that you feel the full effects, but depending on how quickly your metabolism works, you may not be there yet. And that's when folks get in trouble. They have, you know, a quarter of that cookie, and within an hour they say, oh, I don't feel anything, or, you know, my back still hurts. I'm going to eat the rest of the cookie. And then just as the first quarter of the cookie is kicking in, they eat the rest of the cookie and end up having an unpleasant experience. So you can always add more. You can always add more, you know. So with a new product, just give yourself time. Give yourself plenty of time. And just a reminder, right, tortoise wins the race. You don't need to come zooming out of the gate and end up falling out under a tree, right? You want to be slow and steady. You want to have all-day pain relief. You want to be able to function. And it might not look sexy. It might not, you know, be what some people think of when they think of people who use cannabis. But this sort of responsible use is very important for patients, right? All right. I want to teach you a very easy homemade recipe for canna butter. And I share this because this is the building block for edible products, right? If you can do this, then you can also infuse olive oils. You can also make your own topicals. It's much easier than you might think, okay? So this is a very basic recipe. As we go through it, I'm going to suggest some hints and tips, but if you're doing it for the first time and you follow these steps, you should come through with shining colors. All right, so let's dive on in. You're going to need an ounce of trim or shake. So remember way back at the beginning, we showed you that plant. We were talking about the trichomes, and I said that some of those leaves have bits of trichome on them, but you would trim them off during the harvesting process. Well, this is why you save that stuff. This is why we sell small flour and things, right? So you want to use that as your basis. You're going to need a cookie tray or pizza stone. You're going to need a pound of butter, 2 quarts of water, a stock cup, a colander or a strainer, some cheesecloth, a glass bowl or a second sauce pot, and a stiff spoon. It's that easy, right? The first thing that we're going to do is decarboxylate our cannabis. And just like titration is sort of a fancy word for dosing, decarboxylating is a fancy word for toasting, right? And we do this in order to activate as many of those THC molecules as possible. If you don't decarboxylate or toast your trim or shake, you'll still have a potent butter at the end. It just won't be as potent, right? What we're doing here is trying to, again, it goes back to that THCA molecule. We're converting that into THC ahead of the need for our liver to do it, right? So since we're not burning it, typically if we were smoking it, those THCA molecules get to a certain temperature and they convert themselves, right? That little acid is released and it becomes THC. When we're cooking with cannabis, oftentimes the recipes don't get to a hot enough temperature to make that happen. So the THCA remains unexpressed, and while it does have, you know, some therapeutic value, a lot of folks find that the THC is more effective for them, right? So decarboxylating simply means spreading your flour. I would grind it up. Don't use whole buds, but grind it up as you see there in the picture. Spread it on a cookie stone or a cookie pan or a pizza stone, and bake it at about 220 for about 30 to 45 minutes. Now you can go online and find all sorts of different charts that show the various cannabinoids and what temperature is their boiling point. What temperature do they start to evaporate? By placing the oven at 220, we're avoiding those higher temperatures. We're keeping the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids intact. So you're getting the maximum therapeutic benefit from your product, right? The cannabis should smell toasted, but not burned. Kind of like the difference when you walk into a coffee shop and they're roasting the beans. There's a breaking point where you're like, oh, that smells good, and then, oh, that's too much, right? And you'll get that right away. And I should say here, and I think I put it at the end as well, cooking with cannabis is a smelly business. So you're not going to be able to do this, and if you live in an apartment building, it will be difficult to do this and not possibly have your neighbors know. So if you are in a location that is not cannabis friendly, just be aware of that, okay? So we decarb our cannabis. We ground it up a little bit. We spread it out flat. We baked it. And we're going to infuse it into the water and butter. So basically, you get that water boiling. When the water is boiling, you add the butter, and you can use salted or unsalted, whichever your preference is. I'm a salted girl myself, but it's just a flavor preference, and that's it. When the butter is completely melted, you want to stir it in and reduce your heat. You don't really, you want it to be just barely simmering, just tiny, light bubbles maybe, and stir in the decarboxylated cannabis. Okay, and then you're going to simmer it uncovered on that same low heat for about 3 hours. Okay. How will you know when it's done? It's going to start looking like it does on the right there, right? The surface, most of the leaf material will have bubbled up to the surface. It'll look glossy, it'll be thick, and it'll be about 3 hours, right, on a very low simmer. You're going to want to take it off the heat. You see that in the picture there, they're wearing gloves. Be careful with this process, and you don't want to use a plastic receptacle. You want to use a glass bowl or a second sauce pot. People have burned themselves by pouring a hot liquid, either butter or tincture, into a Tupperware directly, and the Tupperware could not stand the heat. So it will be warm. You're going to line your colander with a cheesecloth. You're going to place it over your receptacle, whether that's a bowl or a pot, and you're going to pour that mixture into that receptacle. It's going to be very viscous. You can see in the picture that it kind of pools up on top of the cheesecloth. That's fine. You're going to have to kind of go slow again. And this is where that spoon might come in handy to kind of push down and squeeze out as much of the liquid as possible. You can set it up in a double boiler situation in a way where you can pour the whole thing in and then just let it seep through. It might take a while for it to seep through the cheesecloth and the strainer. All right. Next step is you're going to take that cheesecloth and gather it up into the sort of a knapsack shape, a kerchief shape, right, and just squeeze all of the remaining liquid into your collection bowl. Now the mix may still be, if not hot, warm. So again, gloves or a hot pad, and you're going to want to squeeze it out. And then take a look in that collection bowl, and if you're happy with the consistency or the color, of the mixture, you're in good shape. Some people don't mind little bits of leaf in their butter. Some people prefer a cleaner product. So if there are still bits of plant matter in the butter, you might want to repeat the straining process with a new piece of cheesecloth. Something to know about that is if you're going to be storing this for any length of time, best to have minimal plant material left in it because it will, it's a birthplace for molds and bacteria, things that you wouldn't want growing in your butter while you're storing. All right, next step. Okay, you've got your glass bowl or your receptacles full of what's going to look like a viscous sort of mix, right? And you're going to maybe be thinking, I'm not sure if this is working right. Put the can of butter in the fridge. And don't look at it for an hour. And you will be amazed. You'll come back, the butter will be on the surface and solidified, and it'll be floating on the remainder of the water that you have squeezed out of the cheesecloth, right? And at that point, you are ready to, you might need a knife to kind of slide around the edges of the bowl. You'll be able to lift the butter right out. You'll probably want to put it face down and kind of scrape any of the remaining water residue off. Again, just because if you're going to store this, you don't want any medium that will allow for mold or bacteria to grow. So you're just going to scrape the very, very top layer of your butter off, right? And then cut it into whatever size containers you want and use it in whatever recipe calls for butter, right? In the fridge, it's going to stay for about 3 months. In the freezer, about 6. If you want to get fancy, if you're adept in the kitchen, you can instead of using like a collection bowl. I know some folks have made gifts and things. They make molds. They pour the heated mixture directly into a glass mold, and then pull the butter out, and it takes the shape of whatever the mold is. So you can get as fancy as you want to with that. So again, you can use this butter anywhere a recipe calls for butter. Because we're using an ounce of trim to a pound of butter, it's a fairly low dose. It's a fairly mild dose. This particular recipe. You can increase the amount of trim. You can decrease. You can use a half ounce to a pound of butter. If you want to start even slower, that's up to you. If you have already got the can of butter made and you find that maybe you try a batch of cookies and they're a little too strong for you, the next time you make those cookies, just have split the amount of butter that the recipe calls for and go half can of butter, half regular butter. And your product will end up less potent as well. And as I said, before you do it, you want to plan for odor control because not everybody feels the same way about the smell of cannabis, even though some of us love it, some of us don't. So, all right. So you've got a pretty good overview of delivery methods and dosing. You've got an easy-to-follow can of butter recipe. I'm wondering if there are any questions before we go. I know that we have one question while we're going along. Someone asked if we classify a tincture as an edible, and yes. For these purposes, a tincture, because you are swallowing it, we're going to count as an edible. They will take effect slightly more quickly than a solid edible. If you put your tincture in a warm beverage like tea, you may find that its potency is slightly increased, and again, that's because some of that THC might get warmed up enough in the tea to become THC itself. The A molecule can fall off. But yes, tinctures are edibles, I would say. Any other questions? No? All right, seeing none, I do just want to point out, producer Ben is super happy about this. We have an Instagram account now, and you can find us at Maine Wellness there on Instagram. There's our Facebook page, we're on Twitter, there's our website. Actually, at our website, we have other recipes as well, and in the dispensaries, we also sell cookbooks and have free recipes to take home. So whatever your preferred method is, we hope that you're doing it safely, and that if you're curious about cooking with cannabis, you give it a shot and let us know how it goes. Let us hear your feedback. Producer Ben, are we good? Producer Ben has given me the thumbs up, so we are going to sign out. If you have any further questions, if you're like me and you'll realize what your question is about 10 minutes after we finish here, you can always email them to info@ mainewellness.org, info@mainewellness.org, and producer Ben or I will get back to you as soon as we can. All right? Thank you for joining us today. I hope everybody has a lovely day, and we will see you next month. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks.